Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Lodge here at No Code North. Today we are having Jeremy come back and continue the workshop that we started last week on accessibility and Webflow, because Jeremy has so much information to share that it's like we could not get through it all last week. So I have to say, this is going to be a really good series of two workshops for you to review and check out the things that you need to know to make your Webflow websites accessible. And now I'm going to just turn it over to Jeremy and let you go.
Hi everyone. So I wanted to, I guess the first thing I wanted to see if there was any questions from like last time. If you had anything you were thinking about that you wanted to ask questions on first, maybe just get that out of the way based on the stuff we've already covered. And I wanted to just go back and touch on two things, I guess, before we like move on. But I think because we're dealing with a lot of the basics that we've already covered, I think this next bit is going to move a little bit faster than we did last time. So any questions, any burning questions anybody has, I guess is the first thing. Nope. If not, okay, perfect. So one thing that I don't think I explained really well last time, because we were kind of jumping all over the place, was I wanted just to dive a little bit into alt text, because um, the assumption is I always think, oh, people know what it is and we don't have to go over it. But I think it's important just to identify what alt text is there for. And that is to give description of the images in context of what they're needed for. So you don't have to use words like image. I mean, in the case of logo, you might want to establish that there's a logo if there's like a series of logos or something like that. Then people can identify that it's like the Amazon logo, and people identify things that way. But the main thing when we're dealing with alt text is if it's in context. So where we see it with nav bars, more so where we are, let me just pull up the other. We see it often in Navbar. This is actually just text, but if there's a logo here, we don't actually take the image or the alt text describing the image. We oftentimes for links we describe where it goes, and so in like a nav bar with a logo, it's usually going to say this company's name, home. That's kind of the idea behind it. So that was one thing I wanted to go for. The other thing is I know we covered skip link in the design aspect of it, but the way that the skip link works, and I was talking, I think I was talking about Corey Mullen's mast and how I learned something with the skip link with that. And so if I go into this header that has a skip to main link, and part of this is like, this is componentizing things, which is not a big deal. But if you're going to be creating a skip link, in the settings, instead of going to where we would normally go for like a page section and having the main on there, if you do this in a component, you lose it every single time, and then you have to make sure that it's hooked up every single time. Whereas if we do it just by using the ID main, not Manny, then we have it kind of set up. So any page that we have this main put on for the landmark, this will just end up working. And so this was the part that the way that Corey had it done, I was like, oh, that's much better, because it's not going to change any of the time when we're dealing with our main landmark. And the last thing with the main landmark is we use a tab index inside of it, which I didn't go through here. Let's go to our main wrapper here. We have our ID of main, and we have a tab index of number -1. And what that means is when the skip link goes into the tab index or into the main, then it can access the information straight into the main. And so that's one thing that we want to be doing for accessibility, is adding that tab index into our main landmark. Okay, that was those two things. What was the last one?
Jeremy, I actually do have a
Yes.
question about skip link. I've been doing skip links for a long time, and I have a JavaScript that actually moves it to the main, but I noticed you're doing it, I think, just with CSS.
Yeah, it's just
It,
doing it. So we, I thought the JavaScript was necessary as well, but it's actually not. It's not for accessibility purposes. You don't need it. We can do it directly in Webflow by just changing the tab index.
okay,
And so if you just add that tab index to your main wrapper, your main landmark, you get that directly from. It's something that happens. It kind of works the same way programmatically. Is like when that skip link is clicked, it goes to something and it triggers the ability to have the tab index of -1. But the tab index of -1 won't show up unless it's directed directly to the skip link. Like that's the kind of the way it works. And
okay, and
so
that's what the
you
JavaScript does.
don't need the JavaScript
Got it.
to set the focus inside of it. So if you click on the skip link, it should take you directly into the content of whatever your main is, and that's
Right,
how it does it. It puts the focus into there with the tab index.
right, and that's the problem with just grabbing code and putting it in without understanding what it's actually doing. I never actually understood what it was doing. So great, thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah,
anything
it's
that goes straight into the markup will be read right off by the browser, like anything you do in JavaScript is loading afterwards. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's definitely much better to avoid using JavaScript for that kind of thing
Okay.
if you possibly can, because once you're, you don't know what's going on in the browser might
Mm-hmm.
crash, there might be other JavaScript things that break, who knows what. But if you get
Yep.
it in ahead of the JavaScript, then it's much more reliable.
All right. Great.
Yeah,
Thanks, Jeremy.
and that's awesome, Julian. And that's more of what we're going to be talking about today in some of these things that we're going to be dealing with is that we're going to be using HTML elements that eliminate the need for JavaScript because they have built-in accessibility with them. And these are things that we now have with our custom Webflow custom elements. A lot gives us access to all of these things. So you start learning about all kinds of the different HTML elements that exist and how you can put them into your project. And there's numerous, but there's a few common ones that we use all the time that we'll be going through as well. One last thing. Oh yeah, when we're talking
Maggie,
about
Maggie, can you share that screen again? Thanks.
one last
Okay.
thing when we're talking about, let me go to, here we go. That's a skip link. Let's just go to, because we are going to get back to here. So the semantic HTML, we talked a little bit about buttons, but I don't think I was super clear. And one of the things that buttons automatically have a default type of submit. And so one thing to be careful of when we're using buttons elsewhere in our site, which can happen depending on the browser and whatnot, is you can have a button that's going to submit a form that you don't intend to. And so in using the custom element button, we use type of button if it's not a submit. Webflow uses input type of submit for like their basic submit for forms. But that's just one thing to think about with buttons is we just need to add that type if it's not a submit form. So that was one thing that I think we kind of glossed over as I was trying to speed through things last time. So we'll take a breath, and now we're just going to go into our last bit of our main HTML element that we use everywhere, and that is list elements. We should really be thinking about building our sites with as many lists as makes sense. And Webflow does this automatically when we use the CMS collections. There's lists, and there's in this project there's breadcrumb lists, but like there's a whole bunch of lists, features and benefits, teams, menus, post groups, tags. Like it's all lists upon lists. Sliders or carousels, they kind of get grouped anyway, and they also get put in lists if you're using in a collection, but you don't necessarily have to build them in a list, especially if you're using an external slider thing, because it's actually doing something and grouping them together. But a general rule of thumb is like, think about the things on your page. Even if it's like a list of 3 items, it's still a list. And so that makes it understandable. It's not only just understandable, it's also navigable for screen readers to go through and understand something, because we can navigate with a screen reader completely with lists as well. So if I go into
Scan
our
off.
screen reader,
Narrator window, close, semantic HTML and Aria.
I'm just going to go into lists.
Semantic HTML elements region, dynamic link example, 14 common misconceptions.
So this goes
list exam, Aria roles and slots list, no next list.
So we can run through a website's lists as well. So it's just another way of navigating quickly through a website. And that's just, people can use basically L or Shift L to go back and forth.
Breadcrumb navigation.
And then they can get all of the visible lists on a site. So it's another navigation thing, along with headings and stuff like that, to quickly find information for people that are using screen readers or other assistive devices. So when we start thinking in lists, and then we're giving more information to people using it. Whereas instead of just using like a bunch of divs that look like a list, we're putting them in a semantic meaning that more people can understand. And so that's one of the biggest importance of lists. Now with Webflow, so an extra thing we can do with lists is we can use Aria labels to like say what a list is or something like that on the list element itself. And I think that's kind of it for lists, except for one thing I wanted to do was the Aria role and slots. So when we're dealing with components and slots, this is where I've made a suggestion that Webflow should kind of maybe allow some way for a slot to be a list, because right now you would have to put a slot in a list or a list in a slot, and then it doesn't quite work the same way. But what we can use, when we talked last time about, the best rule of Aria is not to use Aria, and it is unless you have to. And this is one of these ones where we have to. So if we're going to be using components and we want to be making sure that things are in lists, we add a role of list and a role of list item so the slot itself can get the role of list, and then the item card or whatever we want to put inside of it, we're going to give that a role of list item. And so automatically, as you saw when I was going through quickly with the lists here,
Semantic Aria roles and slots list.
This is a slot.
Heading goes here lorem ipsum or sit amit. Consecutor additive.
And so it's recognizing that it's a list. So that's kind of, and then lists have properties within them. You can navigate within lists and list items and stuff when you're going into
tagline medium length section heading goes here lorem tagline medium length section heading medium length section heading goes here lorem ipsum dolor sit tagline medium
so
exiting narrator.
This allows somebody to again quickly go through a list and a list item using familiar keyboard commands when they're using assistive devices or other things. So that is, and this is why Webflow actually makes it really easy, because we have the ability to use lists throughout. And so we just kind of have to start thinking in terms of lists. So any questions before I move on? No? Alrighty. So let's talk about the Webflow Navbar. I did touch on the fact that we want to use the Webflow Navbar because it comes with a bunch of accessible things for the opening, like when we're doing all of the opening and closing of things. The nav bar has a header built into it, and the nav menu is a built-in. It has the tag of nav, so we have taken care of those two landmarks with it. But we can go further, and we have to go further with accessible nav bars because there's some things that aren't included in it. So we talked about creating focus for our links and things like that. But one thing that doesn't happen automatically is when we use a drop down. And so in a Webflow drop down, where is it going? Accessible nav bar. Here we go. A standard drop down doesn't have a focus state to it. And so one of the things we want to make sure that we're doing right off the bat is if we have a drop down, we want to make sure that we're adding a style. We want to add a focus keyboard state to it. Being focusable and skips the or it won't show up that a person is on that particular item, and as you're tabbing through something fast, you don't get that the visual cue of that. So we're using the focus state. The other thing I talked about redoing kind of the functionality of the nav bar. Fun fact, the Webflow AI has already changed the way that they structure their nav bars. So what should happen with a nav bar is that your nav menu should be in a list. It's a list of links. And so it gives context to how many links there are. The other thing is when you put a drop down in, as we have here, and we have another list inside of it, and then it gives hierarchy to the different levels of listing. And that just happens because we're using an HTML list. And so with this, it makes our nav bars completely accessible. Now, there's a bit of, conversation, as there is with a lot of accessibility stuff, that, maybe it's redundant to have an item inside, like a nav bar item inside of a list when it's like you can already tell that there's a list because of the menu. But when you start nesting, that's when it becomes even more important because, yes, it lists the number and it also establishes the hierarchy. So the accessible way of building it is to make sure that our nav menus contain lists and our nav links are in a list. And so there's a couple examples here that I have. This pattern isn't used as much anymore, but this pattern has just been separated out so that we actually have a clickable link for services, and then there's a nav menu drop down as well. And so so that we have everything separated apart so that you can tell the difference. Because if somebody tries to just put a link here and it's connected to your navbar dropdown, when you click on that, it's either going to, instantly it may take you somewhere and the drop-down effect of it won't be there. The other thing to think about when we're talking about accessibility is hover for drop-downs is not recommended for accessibility. We want to be able to control. A user wants to be able to control and wants to know what's happening with it. And when we do things on hover, it eliminates the ability to do that properly. And there can be all kinds of control issues as well, depending on if the hover is not done properly. And you could be hovering over part of a nav, move down, and then the nav disappears, which we've all, I'm sure, experienced at one point in time. And so when we're talking about being accessible with our nav bars, we want to make sure things are clickable and tabbable. And so we're going to add the focus, add the lists, and we've taken an already really great accessible navbar to the next level. The only other thing is if we're going to have multiple navs, that is when we might want to add an Aria label. It's one of these things that we just add to give more information. So if we have multiple navs, we may have a main navigation and we have like breadcrumb navigation below. So I will label, Aria label breadcrumb navigation, I think is probably what I ended up doing with this particular nav here. So any questions on the nav?
Yeah, I have a question because while I was sitting here listening, I decided I would check a couple of recent websites, but I had Safari open on my computer, and normally I work in Chrome, and had checked and it was like everything was working. And in Safari, the links aren't working properly, and I thinking maybe it's either because they're not in a list or I'm missing some vital information um, that Chrome is obviously getting, but Safari is not.
Are they do they have focus states on the links themselves?
I don't remember now. I'm not in Webflow itself to check. So, but that
Okay.
would be the thing to do, is to check for focus states.
Yeah, I mean, are you is it we're tabbing through? Is that
Yeah.
what the
Yeah.
yeah. I would be checking for focus states and see what that would be kind of the thing that I would look for, because Webflow by default does not put on the drop down, does not have a focus state on it.
Right.
And it doesn't recognize it as a button per se, so or a I guess when you do the all links, it doesn't recognize it as that, so it doesn't create it for it. So you
Right.
manually have to make sure, especially for the drop downs, that it has a focus state, because that makes it controllable with the keyboard. Without it, you don't have that, and that's the focus keyboard state. While we're on Safari, one of the things to note is, and you might get the comment, I was building something. I was actually building out a custom menu and not a dialogue, which I'm going to show later. And in some cases, Safari buttons don't work the same way, and so they create a focus state around an element after it's been clicked or after it's been accessed. So for a dialogue or a menu that's been opened, sometimes there's this kind of blue, or if you have another focus state designed, it has that outline to it. And people are like, well, why on my computer does it have this outline? It's a Safari thing because the buttons work differently. There are ways to work around it, as far as creating another element and trap focus in it. And I think it's too complicated to kind of get into. But
Yeah.
please do not remove the focus state because somebody's complaining about it on Safari. Like, look for the the solution that I'm talking about where you can create a focus decoy or something like that, or just explain to the client that it is a fundamental accessibility thing for people, to be able to use this menu. And so the slight annoyance that's there because of a little bit of a temporary, and that's the other thing, it's a very temporary, it just exists on that one click. You click again on the menu or somewhere else, it's gone. So it is this kind of instant thing that comes up, and I just urge people, like, do not remove focus states on things, because of client requests, or it's our job to educate them that, like, this is actually a fundamental thing that needs to be there for people, of all abilities to be able to use your website. Like, and usually that can be a winning argument. And part of this this kind of session is to be like, okay, it's to empower us to think, okay, I know more about accessibility now, so I can talk to the client and be like, that's not a great idea. Or I'm doing it this way because this is a way that more users can use your site, more users using your site. Like, and I've said this before, not everybody's going to care about accessibility in the same way that I do. Like, I really, it's important for me to empower people to use the web as much as possible, and so that everybody gets to have a very similar experience, based, regardless of whatever their ability or disability happens to be, whether it's temporary or whatnot. But some people care about the bottom line, and the bottom line is if you're eliminating accessibility and not paying any attention to it, you're probably anywhere from 25 to 35% of the population of people that may be visiting your website aren't being able to use it properly.
Yeah.
And so from an economic standpoint, that's a bad deal. And so a lot of people could start understanding that argument more, I would think. But yeah, so that would be the thing. Penny, check those focus states and see if there's an issue with that. Because yeah, the drop down, that's like for Webflow Navbar, drop down, add focus state, add list to the list thing is more of something that allows people to understand it better.
Mm-hmm.
It shouldn't impact the functionality of it though,
Right.
as far as tabbing it.
Okay,
It does create an extra div, and that's where people argue that, oh, that's an extra div that this item is going into because it's a list item, and then you're putting a link inside of the list item and whatnot, and so it creates this thing. But for me, from all of the things that I've been reading, it's a small price to pay to have people really be able to understand what something is, even
Right.
if they have to, arrow down through an extra div or something like that. You lose so much if you're not using lists.
Cool. Thanks.
All right. That is lists. Forms. I guess I can knock that one off. Forms, I'm not going to go into the superest detail of things because I think when we get into validation and things like that, it can get a lot more complicated. Test and build. But we do need to talk about forms in general. Forms are one of these things that are actually a landmark as well. So let me just go to, is this my, oh, I switched it from test and build. Let's go to the live because I've already got this set up. If we go to control, I'm just going to turn the narrator back on.
Scan. Narrator window heading level 1. Test and build Google Chrome.
And I have,
Search landmarks window. Search list banner.
so there's our landmarks,
Select
and I have my
scan
form
mode.
here. So if someone knows there's a form, they can go straight to the
Scan.
form.
Sample form. Region landmark.
Now, a few things that we have in this particular form is that we have some instructions, which don't 100% make, actually in this one it does because I haven't gotten rid of the, or hidden anything yet. But we use instructions to give people an idea of how to fill in something. So like a very common one is like required fields must be filled, marked with an asterisk, must be filled in to complete the form. That gives the instructions that if there's an asterisk, they know that that's a required field. Required fields also get
Name asterisk.
So in this
Name
case,
asterisk. Edit. Name required.
it does tell you that it's required as well. So, and that's using Webflow's own, if we go into like the form, I'm going to
Exiting narrator.
we'll be going back and forth a bit. But the great thing about Webflow is the way that they do forms as well. And so you've got your form block, and we get all of these things. We get the name, we know what the form fields are within that particular form. We have form labels, and form labels are actually directly tied to what's below. It used to be where you would have to actually wrap a form label in, and it's good practice because Webflow just associates, we don't have to use something called for when we're building out these labels, and that is associating an ID with the form label to be able to control it properly. Webflow does this automatically by having them grouped. And so you'll often see that where two form items are grouped, and that creates this connection to them. And so with the form input, we get the information for the placeholder. We have the ability to mark it required or not, and we have the ability to set types, which also can bring up error messages if this is directly from Webflow, and it's actually browser based, so it's automatic. Now, this is a common thing for forms. If I'm going back to the test and build, this is actually a bad practice, and it's something that a client might ask you to do, and you may win or lose on this. But we talk about color not being a good indicator of something, an input being clicked on or a focus state. And all we're doing is adjusting the color of the bottom bar here. So that's probably not enough. What you want to do, and one thing to note with form inputs is they automatically take a focus state. So you're going to have a focus state that gets applied to them. You can change it. But so if we're going to go focused here, I'm going to change this to something that is much more visible. And again, this is going to depend on what we use as far as, I'm just going to go 2, and I'm going to go with a 2 offset. Now this is an outline. This is going to go around when we focus on this. And so it's very clear that this is the element that is being focused. And so we want to make sure it's very visible for people. And this can also be designed any which way, match branding and all the rest of it. But we do want to do things beyond just changing a color of something to indicate focus. Much like we wouldn't want to have required fields or a label and then required field in some color or something like that. If we're not going to be, we don't want to say required field is this color, because not everybody's going to be able to see that. So I think that's for forms. The next thing we're going to go with is labels become really important. Now, labels can be hidden though, which is okay in the way of this. I guess I must have hidden it on this email address already. Let me see what I have. I was kind of playing around with this. Okay, yeah. So we're using the screen reader only technique for this label, and you'll see this lots of times. We want to make sure the label is there to inform people how to fill in this, because different screen readers, I'm noticing with Narrator now, it actually is kind of even using the placeholder text more than it did in the past. But we can't rely on placeholder text. Placeholder text gets immediately removed, and so even if you're filling in a form, that placeholder text gets removed, you moved on to something else, you're trying to remember what was the thing that needs to go into this particular field. And if there's no label, then you don't have any instructions on what that is. So the label becomes very important, but it does not have to be visible. So there's lots of times in many Webflow projects where it's like just an email address or something like that. And it's super clear to a sighted user that I just fill in my email address here. That's it for the newsletter. It's still important to have a label. And then we get rid of we hide the label, and we use that SR only, the screen reader only method. So we apply that, and it adds our screen reader only, and then the label exists for the screen reader. And so then that option of that connection is never broken, because labels are really important for that. The other thing that people might not know is labels are important because for people, for clicking onto elements, to get into a field or something, you can actually, if the label is set up properly, you can click a label, so it gives it a bigger target to hit for something, and that will get you into the field as well. So it's another benefit of using labels properly. I think that probably covers the fields. Oh, let's just do a quick, while I'm here, I just want to show what improper. So this is going to expect an email address. Whatever. .com. Okay, and this is sample, and I'm just going to go here. And when we submit this, we get this error message. Now, people, they may want you to dev this differently. They don't like the look of each web browser is going to present this error differently because this is browser based. If you are going to replace things like error messages or things basically that are generated from the web browser, you need to make sure that you are doing it in a way that replaces them, making sure that it's in an accessible way. And what I mean by that is this indicates that something has popped up on the screen to somebody using a screen reader, and they won't be able to proceed without dealing with it. If you just put an error message underneath that just pops up on the screen without any indication, like say you have text or something underneath. So this kind of stuff, when you're doing this, it requires more JavaScript and more coding knowledge to be able to do it. So sometimes we just do things where we're like, oh, well, I'm just going to, mess around and replace this thing. And it's like, we have to think about it in a way that, are we doing something we know how to do that it's not removing accessibility from something? Because it's very important with forms, especially. And this takes extra time too. So if this is a requirement, you need to know that there's going to probably, unless you know directly how to do it, or that the JS solution that you're using, because I think there's a few out there from different companies, unless you know that it's accessible, you need to kind of check that out first before you just kind of adopt something to change the style of something fundamental. And I do have a link that I'll be sharing that kind of talks about that. Like when we're going to be talking about forms, and we can style them in a lot of different ways now, but we just want to make sure that if we're messing with things in the form, we want to make sure that we are using the right HTML elements for things, and then we're not messing with the accessibility that is built into that. Those are things to be kind of really, really mindful of. Yeah, I think that's it for forms.
Jeremy,
Alrighty. Yeah.
with forms, when there's an error message like that, if they're using a screen reader, does it read out the
Yeah, so let's just quickly
Scan. Narrator window heading level 1. What test and build Google Chrome window, test and build document mainlet.
let's go.
Search landmarks window, search, scan, sample form, region landmark. Required fields are marked, name asterisk, email, edit, jeremy.leroux.com, email address, invalid, jeremy.leroux.
So it's even telling me it's invalid here.
Message edit.
Say I'm going past it.
Read, submit, email, edit, jeremy.leroux.com, email address, invalid. Please include an at in the email address.
So that's how it's.
.com is missing an at. Scan off. Suggestions of it. Main link.
So that is what it
narrator
does in the case of a screen reader. Is it like automatically puts the focus back on the field it is, and then it reads out that message. So our tendency would be like, well, I don't really like that. That's kind of doesn't fit my brand or whatever. And that's fine. But you have to know then how to go back. And if you're going to be removing these things, you have to know how to put them back. Which I think is a step that we may not think about in some of these things. We're just like, we do things for design reasons and without thinking about the accessibility consequences of changing those.
So if you're if you're a dev working with a provided design, is that something that as you're, sort of first reviewing, because I'm sure most designers don't even think about things like that kind of an error message on a form. Is that something you would sort of say, okay, look, here's what this is going to look like. Do you want to make that change, or do you just kind of wait until they say, oh, by the way, I don't like that?
Yeah, unless it's specifically been in a design, I don't generally bring it up. But again, it's our job to just educate people. Like, and the other thing is like that's how it appears on Chrome. On Safari, it looks different. On Firefox, it might have some variation as well, right? So every web browser is going to look, it's going to look a little bit different. And so that's and there are, again, there are ways that you can add JavaScript and things to be able to overwrite these kind of things, but you do have to know what you're doing. And so it's
Right.
not just like, oh, I'm just going to eliminate this by hiding it, or like having something write some code for me that gets rid of it, and then I'm just going to do my own thing. It's like I just want to encourage people to like know that there's more work involved, and so it's not just this simple like, oh, it's just a simple design change. And most people don't care. I just bring it up as like, if we are going to be doing these changes, and we need to be aware of what these changes do to something.
Exactly. Well, and also if somebody, if, if the client were to say, oh, I don't like that, let's change it. It's like, okay, so there's a whole pile of work involved in changing this. This is sort of standard with browsers. So it's going to cost you this much to change it. That's why I was asking in terms of
Yeah.
scoping, right? Are you trying to build that in the first place, or do you wait until, and then the client just goes, okay, no, not worth an extra whatever number of hours that might be to change everything, right?
Yeah, for me personally, I think I would be try not to create problems before they exist, and they may not exist. And so, because I think most
Yeah.
clients aren't going to notice or care,
Yeah.
but it's just that sometimes you'll get the odd designer that knows about it and then wants to change and gives you like validation type stuff, and you don't want it to overwrite what the existing is just to match
Yes.
their design. That
Yep.
I guess would be where I'd leave that. Alrighty. Yeah, we're motoring through. Okay. So we've gotten through, this is all of the base level of, and you can start to see how Webflow has all of this accessibility built into it if you just use it with the way it's been intended. Um, and so one of the newest ways that Webflow has allowed this to happen, and it has eliminated the need for JavaScript, and it creates things. I think the term that Kevin Powell was using was progressive. And so what it does is, if the if you added JavaScript onto something for an HTML element or something like that, if JavaScript doesn't work, the the functionality doesn't just stop in a lot of cases in some of these things. The details, which we know is, we built out accordions for the longest time with a whole bunch of extra JavaScript, or a bunch of to make an accordion accessible, you would have to add JavaScript to make it accessible, even if you were using Webflow IX animations, because we have to remember, animations don't make anything accessible. They don't add any of accessibility. It's all a visibility or a visual kind of thing for design. And so when we're talking about, where am I at? Accessible accordion. I used to build out accessible accordions using this kind of whole level of Webflow IX, and then I would have to write a ton of JavaScript that basically would be informing the user that something's open or closed. And that's the main thing with the accordions, is like, whenever we open and close something, whenever we do something that is not expected, we have to direct the user and let them know what's happening. That's the main thing. Like for accordions or modals or things like that, that is a lot of the built-in JavaScript functionality. So the details element, which we now have access to through the Webflow custom element, is an HTML element. It exists, and we have a few parts to it. We have a details, which is this this tag of details, and so that is like the whole wrapper of the details. We have a details summary, which we would kind of think of as like the accordion trigger, and then we have the details content, and we can pop in any kind of content we want into this details. Now the details, let's just go live. Of course, I didn't. Where accessible accordion. There we go. So details opens and closes. That is the functionality of an HTML detail. So we can see how it's an accordion, but we're missing a bit of that JavaScript for smooth opening and closing. And I've provided this this code here that uses actually. It's hard to have something go from 0 height and to whatever height. And so the way that this particular works is it uses grid, and it changes the grid property in an animation. And so I can't go into I think this is too deep to like kind of dive into, but all the information is in here to be able to go and create this this animation that I have here to give you this effect. And so as you see, there's kind of any kind of content you want to put in here that you can have the ability to do that. And it works and operates like an accordion that we're kind of used to. And there's a little bit of CSS to change. You can do things with CSS to change like the ability what this, the details summary looks like and all those kind of things. But this is an actual HTML element. So if we didn't want to like create this smooth thing, we don't have to write any JavaScript. This requires nothing but setting up a details element. And also, if for whatever reason the JavaScript is shut off or is not working, this just reverts back to this details. So it's a progressive enhancement that we can do, but if it doesn't work, our details doesn't stop working, which is kind of the important, the important part to that. And so it would just go back to the regular functionality of a details. And we don't have to write any JavaScript code to make this happen. It's just an HTML element. One thing to note is the details element, much like the dialog element, has an open attribute. So if I remove this open attribute, this is how it ends up being generally. So as far as it being open, so that people can, a client can edit it or something like that, you would have to add the open attribute to it. Now, we did have that great workshop with Tony about Webflow helpers. And this was one that he kind of showed me a little bit that we can get around, so that if you do want a client to be able to edit their details and not have to adjust this open every time, we are using, it's actually quite ingenious. We're using there's a double details component in here. One is actually holding the content properly that we're going to be editing, and then the other one gets hidden. And the way this works is we have a data Webflow designer details, and I'll link to Tony's Webflow helpers. It's CSS code that basically works just for the display in the designer. And so we're using that to force this open so a client can go in and edit the content. And then in the case where it's a component, so we're making the two paragraphs in this the same so that one gets hidden and one details gets hidden at the end, and the other one, I think I'm being very confusing with this, but it is possible if, say, you need a client to have access to a details, to use Tony's method to be able to have that details accessed. Otherwise, I think it's pretty simple and straightforward. You just need to go into the details and then add that open true to it. And then that will be open. And then they can just close it. The concern was that people would forget to close them and then it would be open on the live site. But I don't know how much of an issue that is. But that is important to note that this open true is required if people are going to be able to see the content, and that automatically happens when it gets clicked. And so that's how the details works, is when this gets clicked, the open becomes true. And so, but what I want to get at is that this is an HTML element completely, that we don't have to worry about doing what we did in the past with all of this kind of stuff, creating these quite complex animations. And also we had to write a ton of JavaScript just to make this accessible. So when we use the right element for the job, then we can eliminate a lot of that just by using the right HTML element. And that's what a lot of the HTML elements do, is they eliminate all of these kind of workarounds that we used to have to do. And now we have access to them with the Webflow custom element. So it's good to learn about them. Another common one is details, is the modal. And again, there are a ton of different previous ways that we had to do this, with a lot of extra work to make things accessible. Because what a modal requires is a modal or a dialog. So dialog is the HTML element. And for accessibility, it traps the focus inside of that element until it becomes untrapped. So what that means is that if you're a modal or a dialog pops up, you can't get out of it unless you close it. And you can use keyboard commands to close things with escape key and different things like that, but it automatically traps the focus. And a dialog does that automatically, the trapping of the focus. Now, there is a little bit of JavaScript that is required for dialogues, but it's not accessibility. It doesn't make them accessible. It is just a trigger for a button to open the dialog or close the dialog. So it's not as complicated. And there's also a little bit here. This is taking from a combination of WebBay has a great dialogue video, and then I added this because dialogue. What we used to do, so for a modal, we would have a background overlay or something, then put something over top of it when it pops up, and so we'd have to create something that allows it to be clickable for the background and stuff like that. And now dialogue has these things in it, and we don't see them. So this is a bit of the magic, is that these are properties that exist within a dialog HTML element that we don't see, like you can't see it in the structure. And so they have a built-in backdrop. And so we can affect different things on the backdrop. And we can also do transitions and things like that. So this is all completely CSS transitioned dialogue. And so it's a very easy thing to kind of implement. And then this is the script. It's not that long. It's actually quite short. And what we're doing, and this one would be applicable for any dialogue, because what this does is this uses data attributes and finds the closest sibling element. And so what's important with that is actually how a dialogue is constructed. So if I go here, we have a dialogue wrapper. So everything needs to be wrapped in a wrapper. So the dialogue and the button that's affecting it need to be in the same wrapper, because these are now sibling elements. And so this is the button that we're finding, and then we're finding the sibling dialogue that is going to open with it. And so if I go into, let's go live. See if this is going to work for me. What's going on? Something's not working. I can't see it. That's good. Always good for a demonstration to like. Why can't I see it? Something got name changed. This is why live is awesome. What's going on? Oh, I do. Might just have to direct for another. Yeah, I don't think troubleshooting this is the best right now. So I'm not going to, I don't think I'm even going to try. It's way too complex to do it. Again, so when this works properly, for whatever reason, it's decided not to. When you have this again has the open attribute. And so if we add this open attribute, it should show up, and maybe, let me see what's going on. Oh, you know what? I wonder if it's that. No, it shouldn't be. Let me see. Let's take a quick look at the code embed. Data open modal. Is it missing the oh, it's there. It's not showing up on the screen, which makes me think that I've got it. Do I? Yeah, I'll figure out and fix it, and then it'll be fixed in here anyway. But yeah, I'm doing a great bang up job of showing the dialogue. But WebBay has a great tutorial on this. The only difference is I found that if you're using, I think WebBay uses some Webflow animations or something else, and doesn't make use of the backdrop. And so that's where I was like, oh no, you can do all of this using CSS animations. And so it's more lightweight, and it's not using extra JavaScript to do things. Like that's the one thing when we're dealing with a lot of Webflow animations, especially when we're talking about fading in or fading out or things like that. These are actually things that can be achieved with CSS. And I think one of the best things to kind of go back to when we're talking about learning accessibility is you really are diving into the CSS that exists for HTML elements and figuring out, you know, what things can be manipulated or need to be manipulated to do things. And so I recommend highly everybody just kind of, I built this site so that people could be able to use it. Maybe there's the JavaScript from the old way interfering with the new one, but this seems to be a new issue. And I apologize, but I don't think it's fixable. Definitely not in the time we have. All right. This is going to be the last thing. And this was kind of a fun thing that I just kind of started playing around with. And I've been paying a lot of attention, and as most people have, to Timothy Ricks and WebBay, and Kevin Powell does a ton of stuff on CSS tricks and things like that, and a lot on accessibility. I've learned from a ton of people. There's so much information out there. And one of the things that I find that we use a lot of the time is we use cards and we use sliders. And Timothy Ricks has an awesome demo for an accessible or a swiper slider. And swiper now is probably one of the most accessible slider carousels right out of the box as far as a JavaScript library. And so it's very, very used through Webflow projects. But one of the things is carousels can be notorious for being inaccessible. Even trying to use like swiper ones, because when you start tabbing through, now this one's built differently because this is a combination slider, but if I'm tabbing through, we're using a combination of WebBay's ultimate card setup and Timothy Ricks's swiper instructions, and it gives us extra abilities, but also in a way that is accessible. Let me just turn on. I think this shows it better.
Scan. Accessible card swiper slider. Google Chrome window. Accessible card swiper slider document mainland 1/5 group.
So why this works really well
slider current page
is because swiper allows you to have keyboard commands.
1/5 group link 14 common misconceptions about web design 4. Link this link 2.
So we can just
link 3/5 group link why we love Webflow and you should too.
So it's actually telling us that the ability to go through
Americana,
and it tells us which slide we're on.
Link 7 of the best examples of beautiful blog design. 3. This is 2/5
So
group.
this is the finished project. What ends up happening without this?
Go to slide 1 button. Go to slide 2 button. Go to slide.
So this one's only got 3 slides because it's considering the whole thing a slide for this button here.
Previous slide button.
This is where it gets complicated in most regular sliders, is you're going to have, you hit previous and then you try to get back to whatever the carousel is. And so with this style, all of the information for accessibility is right up at the top.
/5 group link main.
So it's right when we get into it. And so that's where this combination. So I'm going to quickly go over what this is and turn that off and show what the combination is. So WebBay has this, the ultimate card, and what it does is it makes a whole card clickable. and then we also have the ability for nested categories in here. And what it does, let me just see if I can pull up the code here real quick and just explain it. Where is it here? Okay, so first, this is the swiper slider. It looks more complicated than it is to use, but it's not. And where did I put? If you start using it, this just is a lot of options. And so there's the keyboard being enabled. We can choose our own navigation elements, our own pagination elements, our scroll bar. I will link to Timothy Ricks's excellent YouTube video on how to build this in Swiper, and the pieces that you need. And once you, I think it's probably one of the best ones that I've come across, and it's brand new. And so it explains how we can build these very custom, because when we're naming things like our scroll bars or our pagination or our previous next buttons, we can style them to our heart's content, and they just function the way that they're supposed to do. What am I missing here? I think code embed, maybe this is it. Nope. It's our only card. There's CSS involved. Why? I think I'll just have to link to the card thing instead of trying to explain this live. But WebBay has an excellent way of doing cards. Instead of wrapping a card in a link, which you can't nest links in Webflow without using other other solutions. A link can't be nested inside of a link. Makes all kinds of things complicated. What this basically does from a CSS perspective is it creates an extra div using before, and it creates this wrapper that allows the whole card to be clickable based on the card title. In a nutshell, that's what it does. I have the link that I will provide in the YouTube video when this goes live as well. So I did a really bad job of explaining that. This one's not going as well as the last one, but that's okay. It's more complicated stuff, and things are bound to happen live. Hopefully,
And we know where to find you.
Yeah, well, that's exactly. I'm not hard to find. I welcome any kind of questions that we might have on this kind of stuff. You can just reach out. Happy to help in any way I can. I just want to encourage everybody to try. Like, even within the accessibility practice, there are debates on what works best and what doesn't. But when you start using things like screen readers and you start tabbing through things and just simple kind of, and to learn how to use, basic commands of a screen reader, it's not that complicated. I actually would say it's not complicated at all. If you just start looking, pick one. So I use Narrator, which is free for Windows. Mac has its own free screen reader as well. There's NVDA, which is an open source free screen reader, and then there's paid versions. But you can kind of just pick one and then go with it as far as what you want to do. And I highly recommend people kind of start exploring and seeing what comes up in the accessibility tree and what things sound like, because it's about making it usable. So if you've made something more understandable when somebody's going through with the screen reader, then you've probably done a really good job with something. Whether it's like gets nitpicky about like whether this process is better than this process, use your fundamental HTML elements that are already provided in Webflow with the tags and everything else. explore custom elements and see the things that they can do. Because when you're using HTML elements, all of that Aria accessibility is built in. So you don't have to necessarily build on top of it. Maggie had this question about sections, and we didn't know that before you added an Aria label or Aria label by to a section, it was basically the equivalent of a div. Well, now we know that, yes, you can. It's that extra level. But is it required for every site build you have, or do you have to go through that? Not necessarily. I mean, it depends on how deep you want to go with this stuff. Because if somebody can already navigate your site with excellent lists, headings, proper navigation, proper landmarks, you kind of start to see how the site's really accessible already. And so you can add extra landmarks in and do things to like up it and make it even more accessible. But you have to start somewhere. So start with your skip links, start exploring adding more lists to things. Yeah, that's always all I would kind of say on that. It's like, don't be scared of just giving it a go and starting, because if you use these kind of fundamental things that Webflow provides, you will make your site more accessible than many, many, many that exist on the web. And that's really the whole point.
And that's a great way to sort of end and encourage people to just give it a try. It's, nobody's expecting complete perfection, but if you can at least make it an awful lot easier for somebody to get around a site, then it's hard to say, depending on how on a business's audience, as to how much that might make a difference to their bottom line too. You never know. Anyway.
Yeah, it all definitely depends. Like, I mean, I think that's the other thing with businesses is like some are going to require a high level of accessibility.
Yep.
And I do think though that we don't need to shy away from it, and we can, really promote Webflow as a place that you can do this with. And without necessarily having to add extra tools to check it and stuff like that, because if you build from the start with these things in mind, then you are just building accessible sites. When you go through an audit or something like that, it will just be that way. So it doesn't have to be, something that's thought about after the fact, like, oh, how can I, reconfigure this to be accessible, which is a lot more work than just doing it right in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. And then that totally makes sense. Okay. So anybody here in the lodge have any questions before we wrap up? I think we're probably good. So these will be available on YouTube. We'll share them out in our newsletter as well. So folks, if you're not signed up to our newsletter, please do go to nocodenorth.com and join the mailing list. And in the YouTube videos that are going to be shared, we'll have the links to this page, and you'll be able to get the Cloneable from there, so that when you're building your own, you'll at least have a resource to go back to understand how to build them properly. So otherwise, next week is show and tell. Yay! Okay, so show and tell. Make sure you're signed up, and we'll be posting that onto our socials on Blue Sky and Twitter and LinkedIn. But if you've got something recent to show, and it doesn't even have to be recent, it could be just something that promotes your own work and shows what you can do. This is an opportunity to share some of that with the community. It does get streamed as well, so you never know who might see what you can do. And the week after will be our last hangout for this session. But over the summer, we'll be doing summer hangouts every Friday afternoon. So if you just need a chance to connect with folks and do a little Webflow chat during the week, or even no code of any other kind, drop on by on Fridays during the summer, and then we'll start up with more workshops and showcases come the fall. So thanks very much for joining us, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye.